Welcome to the Nurses Out Loud radio show. We will be starting in a few moments, so please stay tuned. If you are watching on social media, please give us a like, share, and follow. And for those of you who would like some more info, please go check us out at nursesoutloud.com. Thank you.
Welcome to Nurses Out Loud. I'm your host, Nurse Ashley Grogg, here on the America Out Loud Talk Radio Network. I am so excited to be here today. I usually, I'm joined with my normal cohorts, Nurse Dave, Nurse Nicole, but instead I have two amazing attorneys with me who are going to help walk through a case that I never thought that we could win. And here in Indiana, we supposedly are a very conservative state. But unfortunately, more often than not, our medical liberties are trampled on. And we're talking about a case in DCS. We're going to get more to that and how this was such an amazing victory over the potential for forced vaccination. So if you've ever had any experience with DCS, if you are concerned that DCS could come take your kids and force vaccinate, we have a little bit of hope for you. But as you know, Nurses Out Loud airs every weekday, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern time with an encore at 11 p.m. and then goes to podcast the next day. So you can catch us on Spotify, on all the podcast apps, on Apple Music. So make sure you're going, liking, subscribing. And then, of course, I love to hear feedback. I want to make sure that we're giving you guys the information that you need. And so go to nursesoutloud.com or email us directly through America Out Loud. Let us know what you would like us to cover, because we value nothing more than your feedback and being able to support what's helpful to you guys. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of my good friends and colleagues here in Indiana, both attorneys. Lindsay Franklin, who does family law, and then Michelle Harter, who does constitutional law. So we're going to start with Lindsay. Lindsay, I just want you to tell everybody, why you got into family law, what brings you into that space, and what your usual workload looks like.
Sure. So I practice family law in Fort Wayne, Allen County, Indiana. I guess what brought me to family law is I started practicing a few different areas of law, and I really fell in love with helping people, helping them through a very difficult time in their lives, whether that's divorces, custody, modifications, adoptions, which can be great and sometimes intense. So really helping families with those things, as well as children. I love children, have 4 children of my own. And I think it's a very important area of the law.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Michelle, how about you? Constitutional law, that's kind of heavy. Tell us a little bit about your background and why you do what you do.
It is kind of heavy, right? So I didn't know when I went to law school exactly what I wanted to do. I was at a firm, and then I did an internship at the Indiana Supreme Court and decided, hey, I like this judicial stuff, but I liked the justice I worked for mostly. So I applied to him, didn't think I would ever get hired, but I did. And I was supposed to be on a 2-year term there. I stayed for 7 years instead of 2, and the Indiana Supreme Court handled exactly those issues, right? The tough constitutional issues that went all the way up, right? Because most cases don't get that far. The court doesn't have to take cases unless they're really important. So, every day we were wrestling with heavy constitutional questions under the state constitution, the federal constitution, both. And I loved it, and I became good at it. And then when I went off into practice by myself, I thought, well, I am competent to handle these heavy appeals and these issues, so I'm going to do it. I enjoy it, and I've been doing it ever since, and it needs to be done.
Yeah, it really does. It's wild how once you get into the space of medical freedoms, medical liberty, you see all these issues come up, and so many people don't know their rights. They don't understand the Constitution. And when you don't know what you don't know, it makes it very difficult to handle these things. So I would love to know what kind of experiences specifically. You can either answer what drew you into the fight for medical liberty, or you can talk about your experiences and maybe a mix of both in this area where we're fighting for medical liberty and how it usually goes. Do you want to go ahead and start off, Lindsay?
Sure, yeah. So, backing up a little bit, I think I was always raised in a family where you trust the doctors, you vaccinate your kids, you do everything right that the doctor says. I'm married to a chiropractor, and he started questioning those things after taking a master's level class in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And so we, having a young family of our own at the time, started questioning these things. And as we had more children, we vaccinated less and less. And actually, my second, third, and fourth aren't vaccinated at all. So this is a choice that we chose. We felt it was in the best interest of our children. And so when I'm helping people through family law cases, they sometimes come to me and I feel that it's a way to give them education on it. And not kind of push them to one way or the other, but say, hey, maybe you don't just blindly trust the CDC. Maybe you think of a little harder on this. And I'm happy to give them resources, and I do. And I start off by giving them your website to say, hey, just look into it before you rush to making these decisions. In family law, I mainly work with moms and dads. And a lot of times, especially now more and more, we're seeing one parent who wants the vaccinations, another who doesn't. And so if I have one side or the other, I start saying, well, maybe you should look into it. Maybe you should go out and look at these resources, because although you might not be getting along with the other party right now, I don't think they're too far off base, and maybe we can reach an agreement. So kind of mediating the thing, giving them education instead of just blindly trusting professionals in that world, because there's a lot of issues with that we could go down a whole rabbit hole with, I'm sure. But making that decision for your children.
It's funny because I remember when your husband was kind of starting to question, and I mean, do you care?
No, it's fine.
Okay, so Lindsay's married to my cousin. And so I remember we quit vaccinating long before, and I remember Nathan kind of asking me some questions while adjusting me and stuff like that. And then I knew that you were a lot more on the board of like, let's do things by the book, and I think I gave you guys Vaxxed Unvaxxed and had you guys read that. And it was just like, it was a process of you guys learning. And it was funny to see and really watch somebody I know and really see into their lives how that transition happened. And it was definitely a process. So it's not something that people make that jump easy, quickly. It's definitely something that we pray about. It's something that we take very seriously, because you want to do right by your children. And I think that's really great that you provide that education and help, like you said, mediate, not try to tell them what they need to do, but mediate.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm seeing it more and more. Like I said, I've been practicing for 14 years, but I'm seeing the issue of vaccinations come up more and more, as well as maybe some, prescribed medications for things like ADHD with kids and things like that. That's another area that I always bring up in topics, because when I deal with legal custody, it's do we agree on these things, or do we not agree on these things? And a lot of times with the court system, I'm dealing with lawyers, right? I'm dealing with judges who are lawyers, and they don't know these things medically wise. And I think coming at it from a medical standpoint is very hard in the area of law, because as legal professionals, a lot of times we do what the therapists say, we do what the doctors say. If this is what my pediatrician says, well, then that child should be vaccinated. And moving a little bit into the CHINS world, which is the child in need of services cases that we're doing with DCS on the other side. Some of the first things out of these judges' mouths are, are the children up to date on their vaccinations? And I've had an issue with this for quite some years now, because not all of the parents are people who are just, don't want to do it, or uh, kind of behind the eight ball and getting their kids to appointments. It's that a lot of them, or some of them, have the education and they have consciously decided not to vaccinate their children. And so I've brought that to the attention as the guardian ad litem in some of these cases to the judge and said, I remember quite a few years ago, this would have been before 2020. Hey, Judge, this mom decided not to do that, and maybe DCS is involved in their lives for other reasons. It's not medical neglect. It's, there's domestic violence going on in the home, or maybe there was drug use by a partner, or things like that we're getting involved in these cases. DCS is getting involved. And so that was the first time I really questioned the judge at the time. I don't know why this is the question that we're asking, right? This doesn't make sense to me. And so I started really engaging in that conversation with the courts at that time. And then when this case kind of fell into my lap, it was absolutely perfect.
Yeah, the timing was excellent. So, Michelle, what about you? I mean, what's kind of your experience with this? I know that you had worked in Fort Wayne as well in the past in this realm. So why don't you share a little bit about what your experience and kind of background is here?
So, I have kids that range from 21 to just 1 year old. And so I became a mom really young. And I didn't have any friends that were moms, and I was going at it alone. And so I've always been a curious person, even before I was an attorney, asked too many questions, a real troublemaker. I just started reading everything about parenting, and that included vaccinations. And so I read Dr. Sears's book and every book I could get my hands on. And I felt like, they're all sort of not wanting to tell me what to do, but they're implying that, hey, we're not going to tell you to not do it, but don't do it, right? And then I took my kid to the doctor, my oldest, and I felt bullied when I asked too many questions and wanted to see the inserts, and they wouldn't give them to me. And I looked at the guy and I said, hey, I don't buy bread without reading the label. So you're not going to inject anything into my daughter until we talk about what's in it. And I see not just a generic card from the CDC, but the actual insert. I want to see it. And he wouldn't give it to me. And he threatened to call New Jersey. I lived in New Jersey at the time, New Jersey's protection agency, which has a different acronym, right? DIFUS, not DCS. And he threatened to call them on me. And I thought, oh no, you would never have to threaten this if it was something good. And that was the point where I just started feeling like I can't do this anymore. And I still didn't quit then though, right? Because I am kind of a rule follower. And it's like, all right, maybe we don't give all the shots. I feel like this is a journey for a lot of people waking up, right? Like, oh, well, maybe some of them are good. You never want to conclude the entire system is a scam. But that's where I am now. And a lot of that is that I'm a lawyer and critically thinking about the propaganda, being able to read studies, because, the criticism is, oh, you're not an expert, you're a lawyer, not a doctor. And a lot of lawyers delegate their thinking on issues they're not an expert in, like medical things, because they feel like, well, I want people to defer to my legal knowledge, so I'm going to defer to the expert in another area. But I'm thinking, no, because there's a lot of lawyers that are idiots too, and I wouldn't defer to them. And there's also some groupthink, right? You all received the same training in law school. I can tell when I worked at the court, I'd have interns, and if they didn't tell me what law school they went to, I could tell based on their writing and their attitudes what school they went to, because they were the same mold. That's scary. I think the same thing happens with these doctors. So it's been a long road, and now I've gone from questioning to, no. And as a lawyer, I often get people who don't know. They honestly do not know that you cannot sue if your child is damaged. They really think that they can sue the doctor, the government, the shot manufacturer, and it's a hard conversation to say, no, you can't. There's little to no recourse, going through vaccine court. You're not going to, I don't have an expertise there. I don't know anyone who does, but I'm told that you don't really get anywhere and the compensation isn't worth it. And to tell other people this, everywhere from a parent with an autistic kid to I had a lady in my neighborhood whose husband no longer speaks. After getting the COVID shot, he writes her notes on a piece of paper, and she wanted to know what she could do about it because she felt like her whole life was taken from her because she doesn't have a husband anymore. And having to tell these poor people that there's no recourse is sobering, and it is sad, and it is scary.
Yeah. For our listeners who maybe aren't up to this, if you listen to our show on the regular, we talk about the Act of 1986 and the removal of liability for vaccine manufacturers. What we don't cover extensively is the fact that you not only can't sue the manufacturer, but that covers the person who ordered it, the person who actually injected it. And so I think that that is a really important subject to talk on. The other thing I want to point out from both of you, we've talked heavily about this medical side, right? You can have a religious belief that contains information about science. Now, when you're writing your exemptions, I want to be very clear, keep it particularly clear that these are just your sincerely held religious beliefs. But like I said before, we don't just make these decisions overnight. As both Michelle and Lindsay said, this was a journey they came to know and understand. And that speaks a lot to why some people are partially vaccinated, why they may have received a few, and that journey progresses. And it is a learning experience. It's a matter of letting go of those preconceived notions. And honestly, I think it's the risk of recognizing that maybe our doctors don't know everything. And clearly that's the same thing for attorneys. I want to hone in on other cases, and not in a granular sense, but with that wider perspective. When you guys see these cases come forward, what happens? How do people try to fight? When you witness a judge that's asking questions like, hey, are these kids up to date? Why is that happening? What are they doing? And how do parents usually end up handling that? So Michelle, or I guess Lindsay's off mute. We'll go ahead and start off with her.
So particularly in the Department of Child Services cases, that's when, so these are the CHINS cases, the Child in Need of Services. This is when they're asking that question, because if you're in a regular mom versus dad fight, that question isn't being asked. Okay. So I want to put that out there. So these are in these CHINS cases, and the judges are asking, are these kids up to date on their vaccines? And they're asking this because this is a state agency that, and I'm not sure what rules they need to abide by. I'm sure there's many, but I think when you have a government interest, and they have jurisdiction over these children, they're going to be compelled to make sure we're in line with the CDC. The kids are getting the medical care that they need. They've seen the dentist, ophthalmologist, whatever it is. And so they ask these questions. And in this juncture, we still have parents with their parental rights, because we're not asking these questions, or we're not having these hearings if their rights have been terminated. And that's important, because if their rights are terminated, whoever has custody, whoever is adopting these kids, or the state gets to make these decisions, right? We have parents who actively have parental rights still intact. And so they still have to default to their interest in regards to this. I would say most kids probably are up to date, generally speaking, on their vaccinations. And if they're not in these CHINS cases, they have no problem with having DCS go ahead and administer, or get them to the doctor to get them up to date. But when we do have the parents who are fighting the issues, then that's when, they have to speak up. And if they don't speak up, and if they don't have an attorney, because a lot of times these are court-appointed attorneys, their rights are kind of just trampled on, because I don't want to say no one cares, but well, maybe no one really cares.
Yeah, I think that the courts and DCS, and I guess I should give the disclaimer that long ago I was a paralegal for DCS, right? So that was interesting. Just a contract paralegal during the state hiring freeze, and I could tell stories about their inaptitude, but that's a whole other podcast. But in essence, this is low-hanging fruit for courts, and I think DCS, like, oh, we didn't get it. It's like an oil change to them, right? Oh, got to make sure you're fully maintained here, kids. Got to make sure we have all the dental things, your mouth is full of fillings, and you've gotten all your injections. And they see it as a low-hanging fruit to, because there's this assumption, even before your rights are terminated, when a family needs help, that they've just completely foregone all reasonable and necessary medical care, and that it wasn't a good choice. And I think in undergrad, I heard during a criminology class that they pull people over for not wearing seatbelts because they know that statistically, if you're not wearing your seatbelt, you're also breaking at least one other law, right? And I feel that they feel this way about vaccination, where it's like, well, if we can catch you on this, we know you're neglecting in some way, right? They use it as like a litmus test of, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing for these kids? Because the narrative is, this is just what you do. Everybody vaccinates. Let's not question. Nobody question. The sky's blue. We vaccinate. I mean, that's the attitude that the court system has. And now that people are starting to question, I mean, I will say I've always been looked at as a loon for my views, even before I was fully there. And they think that because you are an anti-vaxxer, you're dumb, or that your view is because you're not critically thinking, when it's actually the opposite. Parroting a narrative doesn't mean you're critically thinking. But the courts, I know how, I've worked around a lot of judges, and they think we're going to defer to the experts. We don't need to make those calls. And that's what happens, is they just follow the little script. They don't ask too much about it. I could tell a story about how I asked questions during a judges conference about the COVID vaccine. I made some comments and I got reprimanded harshly. So it's a very pro-vaccine climate, both lawyers and judges. I've seen signs on the door that if you don't have your COVID shot to go into a law firm, that you need to mask up or not go in at all. I found that to be really crazy and really offensive. And I thought, you're a lawyer. Have you read the Constitution? This is weird. And so I think as it's hard to be a lawyer and to be awake about this topic.
We're going to have to go to break here in just a couple minutes, but do you guys think that part of this reason is, the state is assuming care and they're taking responsibility because something happened, in most cases, something happened that shows that the parents, for whatever reason, aren't, like you said, following the law, taking care of their kids. And so when they assume the responsibility for care, are they worried about legal ramifications of not vaccinating? Are they concerned that if a child ends up with the measles or whatever, and then there is an issue, that family is going to come back and sue them? Or is it just like in the medical profession, we're just checking boxes off because it's just protocol? And either one of you.
I don't know about the first. Maybe Michelle can speak to that since she worked with DCS, because I've never worked for DCS, so I wouldn't really know how they think about that. I would say definitely more of the checking off the boxes thing. But also, I think because they have these children in their jurisdiction, so they have these children, they're wards of the state, and they have already gotten a child in need of services adjudication on these kids, or on the parents, really. And so they have proven, DCS has proven that either neglect or abuse or both has occurred on these kids, okay? And so I think they are, I have to do these things. I have to make sure these things are covered because they're in my care. And whether they're in foster placement or kinship care, which is family-like or friend-like of the family, I mean, either one, I think you're going to have issues if these kids are not doing well from their perspective. Now, from our perspective, obviously, we don't think because they haven't had their vaccinations, they're not doing well. But in their mind, that's what you do.
Anything to add, Michelle?
I definitely think it's the latter, not the former. I don't think they're worried about liability, because if they were, they'd worry about some of the other issues that expose them to liability, right? Like putting a kid back in a house that they shouldn't, or taking a kid from one bad situation and putting them in an even worse situation. I don't think liability is what they're thinking of. And also, in my experience, most of the folks that work at DCS are young. There's high turnover. A lot of them don't even have their own children yet. They haven't grappled with these issues. Like I said, I think it's low-hanging fruit to check the box on. We've done something for these kids because we got them caught up on their vaccinations. feel like they're doing the Lord's work on checking that box. I think that that's the attitude. I don't think it's oh gosh, they could catch something. I don't think that's what they're thinking based on what I've seen.
Yeah, it's pretty disheartening. I mean, I could kind of understand, and from my perspective, not thinking that, vaccines are right for everybody is, I wouldn't be so much worried about that, but it's interesting to just see how pervasive this protocol medicine, protocol care has kind of taken hold. We've had a really robust conversation. It's been really great to get to hear the perspective from attorneys who have been in these cases, who've seen this, and from different perspectives. You each have your own skill sets and thoughts coming to the table. So I'm really excited after the break to dig into this case, because this does give a lot of hope. If you have ever faced, questions by DCS, whether there's actual grounds for your children to be removed, or it's just threats because you homeschool or you don't vaccinate, or maybe you don't want to medicate, like Lindsay had said about ADHD medication, this is something very concerning. So I'm excited to be able to share with our listeners the outcome of this case, and also some of the things that we did, because just as you said, if you don't have an attorney who's done something like this, they're not going to know where to start. They're not going to know how to advocate. And that's what we hope to do for all of you. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from our sponsors at AmericaOutloud.news, and make sure you check out the store that they have there, and the products that they have online. I know you get a pretty good discount for using the coupon codes there on the site. So we'll be right back after this break.
If you are a nurse that is fed up with the sick care model, I have a solution for you. My name is Melissa Schreibfetter, and I am the owner and founder of the Functional Nurse Academy. FNA is the most comprehensive functional medicine training program on the market, specifically tailored to nurses. It is self-paced and equips LPNs, RNs, and nurse practitioners to practice functional medicine, address the root causes of dysfunction, and start their independent functional medicine practices. At FNA, you will learn how to order labs, functional health reports, create customized wellness plans, package and price your services, and even how to market your brand effectively. Graduates earn 90 nursing CEUs, and then they qualify for multiple board certification titles. They also will have access to our exclusive tools, such as our Functional Nurse Toolkit, our social media and marketing kit. And I don't want to just train you and send you on your way. So you also will get access to me each month via the Functional Nurse Academy monthly mentorship program, where you will be able to attend a live class with me each month. So say goodbye to sick care and start your dream career as a functional medicine nurse. Enroll today at functionalnurseacademy.com.
Welcome back to Nurses Out Loud. I'm your host, Nurse Ashley Grogg, and I am joined today by two good friends of mine, attorneys Lindsay Franklin and Michelle Harter. They are amazing, and I've been blessed to work with them to help protect children from forced vaccination despite religious exemption. This was a very scary situation, and I think anybody who chooses to partially or not vaccinate at all has these concerns that maybe you could be accused of abuse or neglect, and then your children could be at the mercy of the court system, whether or not they get vaccinated or not. And that is terrifying. I mean, that is something that I think all of our listeners who have young children can really relate to: the fear, the anxiety, the stress, because if you're in this situation, you've done your research, you know the risks, you have prayed about this, you have asked God to give you direction, and you have to fight culturally, and a lot of times even in your own families, as to why you have these beliefs. These are sincere, significant beliefs. And so when we see people in these situations, and I get messages all the time, mostly about custody cases, which this is a different situation. But I feel very helpless in being able to support them. And so this case gives me a little bit of help. I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay, because Lindsay is the one who got this case and then started with it. So I'm going to let her lay down some of the groundwork, and then we'll talk about the significance and what we did and all the good things.
Yeah, so I have my client's permission to share this story. And she came to me by way of a referral from another law firm who does not take these chins cases, but I do take them sometimes in a private pay situation if I feel strongly about the case and if I think that the parents can work with me and I can really help them. So I took this case. There's 5 children, and I represent mom. And so in these chins cases, even if mom and dad are together, married, living in the same household, they're going to have different attorneys. So she was court appointed an attorney, and she fired them to hire me. And so we were just trying to get her kids back in her home. There's 5 kids, different placements. So fast forward to there was a family team meeting in which everyone kind of meets online and talks about next steps in this case or goals or whether if they need a new provider, things like that. She asked me to hop on to the meeting. I hopped on because there was this discussion of the vaccinations. Placement had vocalized to Department of Child Services, and I'm talking numerous different placements, had vocalized to DCS, hey, these kids aren't up to date on their vaccines, and we want to get them up to date. One of the placements has a compromised immune system and some kind of a heart issue, and maybe, Ashley, you can go into depth on that. I don't really know a whole lot about that, but he was fearful about the recent measles outbreak, and so he was wanting this child in his care to have the MMR vaccine. So I hopped on to the family team meeting and I expressed my client's concerns and her opinion. These are her, deeply held beliefs. These children are not going to be vaccinated. This is her choice. She has thought about this. This isn't a medical neglect issue. And so that's what I restated. DCS's response was, okay, we'll have to file a motion for a hearing. I said, go ahead. So they dropped the ball like they always do. So, a few months later, I get a motion that was filed and a scheduling of this hearing. I immediately called you, Ashley, and I said, I was on my way home and I said, all right, game's on. What do I do? Because, right, I do family law. I deal with statutes, case law, all within that realm. This is constitutional law. I don't do this. And while I have these deeply held beliefs, and I know my client does, I said, I need to help her. And what do I do? So I called you and you put me in touch with Michelle, who's been amazing. And so the 3 of us discussed, how do we take this on? What do we do? And so that's when we decided to brief the case prior to the hearing. And so we all collaboratively worked on that together, and then we had the hearing.
Yeah, I remember that phone call. Actually, I was trying to rack my brain. I think I was walking out of an event I was hosting for my nonprofit, Hoosiers for Medical Liberty, and you call me, and I'm upset. Like, I'm worried about these kids. My first priority is always to protect the medical and religious freedoms of the kids. That's always my priority. And I remember thinking, okay, we've got religious exemptions, and I had remembered a bit about the foster care code for some other project that I was working on. I saw that kids in foster care, despite the fact that they have to have vaccinations, it says very clearly in there that they get if there's a religious exemption or parents have religious beliefs, they can be exempt from that. And so, it was just a matter of, I work with these codes all the time. These are the things that I research so that I can work legislatively. Even though I'm not an attorney, this is where I live. And I knew I didn't want to be overconfident because I'm not an attorney. I don't know constitutional law. And so that's why I immediately turned around and called Michelle. I think we had a previous conversation like the day before about some other things. So I was like, you know what, we're going to call Michelle. We're going to bring her in. I want to make sure that we have all hands on deck to protect these children. And so when Michelle heard about it, she was game on. Do you remember when we first had that little chat?
Of course I do. We've been waiting for a case like this for some time, right? We knew it was coming. The forced vaccination thing is like every parent's worst fear. And so when I got that call, yes, I remember talking to Lindsay for the first time, and it was like, okay, we're going to take this thing all the way if we have to, because this is ridiculous. We were fired up, and we still are. I mean, we're still very fired up about this case. Nothing really gets me more fired up. I mean, there's a lot of constitutional violations that get me fired up. I do some election law, which is spicy to say the least, but nothing gets me more fired up than this one, because it involves children and they're innocent and we have to protect them. And also, frankly, we all have to answer to God, even if you don't believe in him. And I do. And I don't think that morally these things are a good idea. And I think that we need to trust parents, and that needs to come above all else. You might think someone's religious beliefs are crazy, but they're very personal. They're not institutional. We can talk about that a little bit. And they need to be respected. And frankly, if you can't choose what goes in your own body, and you can't choose to do what your conscience tells you to do, even if it's a gut level, I don't think this is right, and you can't articulate it with a Bible verse, if we can't make those two choices, we are not free people. So this is, as a constitutional issue, I think this is top of the pile in terms of choice and liberty. And you can't bang the table and say, this is the United States, we're free, if we're not able to choose for our own children what goes in their bodies, if we're not allowed to follow our own consciences, we are not free people. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It was definitely a wild ride. And I think one thing that you brought up was the fact that your beliefs don't have to be institutionalized. They don't have to be of doctrine. And this is something that we face all the time. And actually, you know, maybe you want to fill a little bit of this in, Lindsay, but when we went into court, it was disgusting to kind of watch what DCS was saying. It was all about protocol. You know, that's what they were doing. This is our policy. This is what the American Academy of Pediatrics says. And, you know, we're concerned about the immune status of one of the foster placements, which when I heard about this individual's condition, I was like, okay, like he has a serious condition, and I'm not going to go into detail just for privacy purposes, right? But this is a significant concern. However, you know, if we were going to go the medical aspect versus the religious aspect, you know, I would have encouraged him to had his titers done. I would have encouraged him to go get a booster dose if that's what he's worried about, because we can't trample on these rights. But as DCS is making this very poor case as to why we should be doing this, we get conversation, and the question is turned to the mother, what are your beliefs? And I about came out of my chair. And do you want to tell a little bit of this story, Lindsay?
Yeah, because this hearing was, you know, was just so intense, and I had you there as my consultant, as a representative of Franklin Law, but I can't remember who asked her that question. I can't remember if it was DCS or the guardian ad litem, but maybe you can. I think it was DCS, if I can remember correctly, but they put her on the hot spot and they asked her, what is her religion? What is her religious beliefs? And she froze, and she didn't know what to say. And I interrupted and objected and made some argument about this is not relevant to this case at hand. But it somewhat is relevant because we're claiming there's a religious exemption. She signed the religious exemption. And so the judge ordered her to answer the question. And she ended up saying something like, I think she said born again Christian. The problem with this case is that we had a placement who, one of the placements who wanted the vaccinations for the child in their care was affiliated with the same church, and that's how she met this individual. This is how she got asked them to have placement when her children were removed of this one child. And so now we have kind of an intersection of he's affiliated with this church, she was affiliated with this church, she's saying she's a Christian, he's some sort of pastor, and they're asking him also is one of the beliefs of this church and your religion that you don't vaccinate. And he's saying no. So I think that was hard. That was a very hard thing to overcome, and I didn't really know what to do. And I know you're telling me, hey, there's no religious test. This you can't she can't ask the religious test. So I can't even remember how we got around this. I think she just answered. Go ahead.
Well, I think she was answering the question, and I'm like losing my mind because they are not supposed to perform religious tests or say you need to tell us what exactly your belief is unless there is a doubt to unless she gives doubt, they can't question it. They can't push in. And I was writing a note and I passed it to you, and the judge was like staring me down, thinking I was going to pass it to the client, and just citing that there was Supreme Court precedent that they cannot dig into those religious beliefs because we live in America and religion can be anything. And I have a video on religious exemptions. I'm like, if you want to worship the neighborhood cat and call that your God, we're in America. That can be your God. And so, it's kind of an odd statement or joke, but, I passed that note up to you and you were able to intervene and say, hey, look, this isn't appropriate. She has this sincerely held religious belief. We've been using this. It wasn't neglect. It isn't just an oversight on mom's part. She has made this conscious decision in line with her faith. And I think that, it was a weird juxtaposition with everybody in the room because this is so out of your guys' scope. And that's where having somebody like Michelle moving forward is going to be really important if we had to go for it. And luckily we didn't. But Michelle, can you tell us a little bit? Because when we were working on this case, I am very much a planner, and I know both of you are, because you want to do what's right for these kids. We want to set the stage so that way these kids can be successful and this mother isn't forced to go against her beliefs based on what DCS was saying. So when we started talking, not only did we talk about the statutes to use, which would be the religious exemptions for the school, which she was already using, the religious clause in the DCS or foster care language, and then there had been some other bills that had recently been passed that would also potentially help. And that became quite tenuous because they said parental rights are absolute unless there's a compelling governmental interest. Do either one of you want to elaborate a little bit about that situation?
All right, so I'm going to jump in here. That is a very common constitutional framework where it's, there's different layers of review of a constitutional issue. And if it's a fundamental right, like parenting, it gets the harshest standard of review, which is compelling government interest and least restrictive means possible. If it's not a fundamental right, and it's a lower level, it's rational basis. So the government just has to prove that what they're trying to do is a rational basis, and that it's not, and that it's somewhat tied to what their action is. So that's really low. So fundamental rights is a higher test. But the problem is this: it sounds more harsh, and it should be more harsh, and it is. But the government thinks every idea it has is compelling. And it will say that it is, the least restrictive means or narrowly tailored to fit in every single case, right? They always think their agenda is the most important. It doesn't even occur to them that it might not be compelling. And also, these terms are largely undefined in the law. And we have that case from the 1800s that they keep wanting to use, the smallpox case. What is it, Jacobison or whatever it is, where it basically says that if you have to get the smallpox thing or pay a $5 fine. But they forget the $5 fine part, and they're just like, oh, the court upheld it. It was compelling. And they use that during COVID to say that, yeah, we have some basis for precedent for the government having a compelling interest and you not getting an exemption. But we don't really have a lot of recent case law. And the case law that we do have, the government gets its way a lot of the time. So when Indiana was proposing this new parental rights statute to codify our rights and wanted to say that yeah, you have them, except for when there's a compelling government interest. Me and Ashley and folks like us were like, oh, really? Because how's that going to play out? And, we could talk about that on a whole separate podcast, but we're skeptical of the language in that law because the government thinks everything's compelling. And we know that some courts would buy that too. Yeah, vaccines, man, that's the best thing you could do to keep your kids healthy because that's the narrative. So I would think a court would be hard pressed to say that it's not a compelling government interest. Thankfully here, the court kind of completely just dodged the issue completely and issued an order where it was like, yeah, this is what the state argued. This is what mom argued, and the state didn't meet its burden. But it doesn't explain what burden it didn't meet. Did it not meet the constitutional burden for religious freedom under the First Amendment? Did it not meet the burden under the Indiana Constitution for your freedom of conscience? That's part of our state constitution. Did it not meet the exemption to prove that the exemptions are wrong? Or was it not a compelling government interest or not narrowly tailored or the least restrictive means? The court didn't parse those things out. It didn't want to delve into those waters. And I think, well, I will say this. In constitutional law, there's something called constitutional avoidance. If the court can decide an issue without using constitutional grounds, they will do so. And especially a trial court, an appellate court would probably be more inclined to get into the constitutionality. But a trial court, if they can duck it and dodge it, absolutely they will. And so I think the trial court took the safest path. I don't fault the court at all for doing it. But the question is, where does that leave us now, right? Because from our perspective, we'd like to see some law that says what goes in your kid's body is never a compelling government interest, ever, ever, ever. And I don't know that we're ever going to get that. But we were thinking that if we lost at the trial court, we were going to seek something like that if it went up. And we were going to take it all the way up if necessary.
I do want to jump in real quick, Ashley. So there was this issue of, in that order, the judge does say that it is the least restrictive means to change placement. That is what we argued the entire time using that parental Bill of Rights statute. And so I think she does touch on it a little bit in that regard. And I don't know if that was her test, so to speak. Like you said, she kind of laid out everything that everyone kind of argued and things like that. But she does say that that was the least restrictive means to change the placement. So we did win. And, I don't really know what test she's using or if it was a combination of everything. But like you said, Michelle, she didn't want to cite the reasoning other than they failed to, meet their burden of proof. I would like to say, should DCS's motion or argument, could it have been a little better? I think for sure. It was lacking in a whole lot of areas. So that's a concern going forward,
That was one of my biggest issues when I was sitting in the courtroom and just listening. They didn't make a case. I mean, and how could you? And this is where I have issue is we have all of this laid out that says in law that the parent has the right to religious exemption. It's in all these places. It's for school. It's for daycare. It's for even foster care. It says it in black and white. And so, was that the easiest thing? And there's so much that I could go into and we don't really have time. But my frustration is that we don't know what the threshold for that decision is. What gives them the right to break these laws that are in place? They have that right. At what point does DCS's argument become enough to bust through that threshold? And I think that's the takeaway here is, number one, if you're facing a situation like this, reach out. You can see that, we all have different perspective and skill levels. I'm not an attorney. None of this is legal advice, just as a disclaimer, and I'll add that on to the beginning. While both Lindsay and Michelle are attorneys, they are not your attorney. They are not giving you legal advice. You really need to consult with an attorney in your state who is familiar with these things. And so pulling together your resources, finding your family law, finding your constitutional attorney, and somebody who isn't afraid to dig into the state code to find out what your rights are as a parent, and then follow through with each of those things. And one of the things I remember very clearly is I think we were like sitting at the island in your kitchen writing out the rebuttals to all these things. And it was so easy, and we could do most of it like from the top of our heads. And that made this case great. So it is a huge victory. These kids did not get forcibly vaccinated, but there's so much room for us to learn. And we want to make sure that people are reaching out. Obviously, you guys are licensed in Indiana, so we're not going to be able to take cases, because this is a national podcast. We're not going to be able to do these cases that are out of state, but we want you to connect with people in your area. We, through Hoosiers for Medical Liberty, will be putting out the Indiana state code and kind of an outline of the steps that we followed to show there's not just one statute. There are layers of protection here, and you have to jump through all those hoops. And I think that it was she probably didn't want to come out and say, I'm going to ignore this law that says you have the right to religious exemption that's in our code. So that least restrictive means, especially with the foster placement that was immunocompromised, was a really easy one to attach, because I think that if she could have found a way, or if DCS would have given her a shred, she would have used that parental rights language as an excuse to allow forced vaccination. And that's the conversation that we had and why we were preparing. And I'm so grateful, because, we went over and we tore apart the what's it called? The motion. We tore apart the motion and put all the pieces into place. And then, Michelle was able to offer information about if we lose this case, how do we prevent these kids from being vaccinated right away by DCS? Not that they're really good about being timely about anything, but with motivated placements, that might have been an issue. How do we take this to the next step? And so that's where having that constitutional piece comes in. And we were able to do those things ahead of time, so that you, as an attorney, being family law, not constitutional law, not dealing with these things, was prepared and could do difficult things without feeling, completely lost.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I said, what do I do? What's the next step? And so we discussed together with Michelle's help, we're gonna tell the court we were gonna file a motion for stay right away. And if she came down against our position, we would request a motion for stay. My concern with that, so if we lost and we file a motion for stay, the judge has to grant that. And if they don't grant the stay, or if they just ignore it, or maybe they set it for a hearing, I mean, this court is notorious for being so backlogged in hearing times and dates. I mean, you're 6 months out. If I couldn't find a time on their calendar, DCS would have gone and had these kids vaccinated. So I was worried about that. I was really worried about that. So glad we didn't have to deal with that. But we did say we were going to, and we made that very clear at this hearing in my oral argument, that we were going to file a motion for stay if she came down against our position in favor of DCS, and that we were going to request a hearing, that they grant the stay, and then we were going to appeal. So we had requested, hey, even if you do grant DCS's relief, that they want these kids vaccinated, they're going to get vaccinated, and the judge is in favor of that. We're asking you, Judge, not to allow them to get vaccinated until our time for appeal is up. And that would be a 30-day window. We were also asking that order be final, because if it wasn't, I think you have issues with appeal. It needs to be a final order in order for you to appeal. That was also another concern, another layer of concerns, because in these Chins cases, you have a hearing every 6 months, review, permanency. And this was considered a detention hearing, because this is an emergency relief, or relief that the DCS was requesting. And so, is that a final appealable order? That was a question I had. And Michelle helped with that.
Yeah, I do a lot of appeals, so we were ready to go in any possibility. We had everything lined up. what we needed to file the trial court, what we needed to do at the appellate level, how to tee it up during the trial, assuming we lost. I mean, we were well prepared. I think we were less prepared for victory at the trial court level than we were to proceed if we lost, frankly.
That's so funny and so true. Do you have any advice for other people potentially facing this same thing? And is that advice applicable only in the state of Indiana? And maybe I shouldn't say advice. Do you have any words of wisdom? Because we're not giving legal advice here, but any words of wisdom for people in these situations?
Well, I think if you're in a Chins case, you need to hire a family law attorney. That's typically who do these types of cases, but not every family law attorney does Chins cases. So like myself, there's many other attorneys in my field who do not take these cases specifically. So find a family law attorney who will take your case. And I'm not saying the court-appointed attorneys are not going to fight for you, because I know most of them and they are lovely people. It's just that this is a research-intensive type of issue. They probably aren't familiar with it, but neither was I. But I was willing to go the extra mile on this thing, whereas a lot of people probably wouldn't. So I think you need to find someone good. You need to find someone who cares. And you need to find someone who's going to reach out to other experts, even if it wasn't, their expertise, but they're still willing to do it, like myself. And that's exactly what I did.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think the first step is lawyer up, right? This isn't something you can fight on your own. I would hire a lawyer myself, probably do some of the work, but I would hire independent counsel on this myself, because this is big, right? These are your kids. You need some help. So while I do constitutional stuff and appeals, I don't necessarily do the DCS trial work. So I'd want someone who could, and I'd fill in. You kind of need like a team of help. I also would reach out to my state's medical liberty group or whoever you have. I believe that other states have these groups as well. I would do that. In fact, I would see if they recommend a lawyer to you, right? Because they usually will know where to go. So I would do those two things immediately. I think some clients think they're going to save themselves a few bucks by doing it themselves, and then they get in trouble, and then they go looking for the help. And it's not necessarily too late. I don't want to dissuade anyone from realizing you're in over your head. Get help then. But I think if you get it earlier, it's probably more helpful and overall less costly for you. Because I get a lot of latecomers. I've had folks who it's like, their lawyer's already lost and we're already in an appeal, and now I'm being contacted. And it's like, man, I would have liked to have known about this a while ago. So I would reach out to a lawyer and a medical liberty organization early. Oh, and I will say this other thing too. If you're a homeschooler and also a person who's not into the government vaccine schedule, join your local homeschool group, because they often have lawyers who are poised to deal with both of those issues, the vaccine and the homeschooling, if they come after you for your religious beliefs, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice, because the fact that you really do have to try to get ahead. I think one of the big things that helped this mom is the fact that she had already submitted her religious exemption. Like, she had done that before. So while this is a huge victory, we finally have, secured this right for a family. This was a huge learning opportunity. Number one, get your resources together. Don't be shy about asking for help. Dig in anywhere that you can. And obviously, plan ahead. I think that was huge for us, and we will continue to fight this. Do not simply rest on, and Michelle and I we did not think, and I think there was maybe some comments made in regards to the strict scrutiny, that this could be used as an excuse to override it. And that's very scary. So gather all things. You should be over prepared rather than under prepared. Go on all the things and have that prepared and ready to go. So thank you so much. This time flies by. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking these cases. I know that this is huge reputationally for you. any attorneys that think that they want to start taking these cases, I encourage you, live by your moral compass. Reach out for help. Let's network and start building a layer of support for these parents. And hopefully we can see how this goes into other cases. That's one thing that we didn't get to talk about, is the implication of this DCS case, the inability to do the religious tests, and also could this law that, Michelle and I don't really care for, compelling governmental interest, is it going to help us or is it going to hurt us? And that is yet to be determined. So that's it for this episode of Nurses Out Loud. Make sure you're following us on americaoutloud.news, and obviously your favorite podcasting app. Leave us comments, send us messages. We love to support you, our listeners. Have a wonderful day, and that's it.
Shining light into darkness, thank you for tuning in to Nurses Out Loud.